Christmas morning turned into my worst nightmare when I walked into my parents' living room and saw my brother's kids unwrapping the exact gifts my children had drawn pictures of just a week earlier. The remote control car Jake had sketched with crayon. The dollhouse Emma had colored pink and purple. The basketball hoop Tommy had begged for. Everything. My kids stood frozen by the doorway, watching their cousins celebrate with their dreams. Dad wouldn't even look at me. That's when I knew this wasn't an accident. This was planned. This was war. Looking back now, I should have seen the signs earlier. But grief has a way of clouding your judgment, and I'd been swimming through a fog of loss for 2 years since Sarah died in that car accident on Interstate 75. One moment we were planning Tommy's 8th birthday party, and the next I was a single father, trying to figure out how to braid Emma's hair and help Jake with his homework while working 2 jobs just to keep our heads above water. My name is Darren, and at 32 years old, I never imagined I'd be raising 3 kids alone in a cramped rental house on Maple Street in suburban Columbus, Ohio. The place has thin walls and a leaky faucet in the kitchen that I keep meaning to fix, but between my day job doing construction with Miller Building Company and my night shifts delivering pizzas for Tony's, I barely have time to sleep, let alone tackle home repairs. Sarah used to handle all the family stuff. She was the one who remembered birthdays, organized holiday celebrations, and somehow made our modest income stretch to cover everything we needed. After she died, I felt like I was drowning in responsibilities I never knew existed. Simple things, like remembering to buy milk or signing permission slips for field trips, became monumental tasks that left me feeling inadequate and exhausted. My parents, Robert and Linda, live about 20 minutes away in the house where my brother Marcus and I grew up. Dad retired from his job at the Postal Service 3 years ago, and Mom works part-time at the local library. They're good people, but they've always had a complicated relationship with money and an even more complicated relationship with my older brother Marcus. Marcus is 35, married to Jessica, and they have 2 kids, Connor who's 9 and Madison who's 7. On paper, Marcus looks like the success story of our family. He owns a real estate agency downtown, drives a brand new Chevy Suburban, and lives in a 4-bedroom house in the expensive part of town with a 2-car garage and a swimming pool in the backyard. Jessica doesn't work because she doesn't need to, spending her days volunteering at their kids' private school and organizing charity fundraisers with the other wealthy moms. For most of our lives, I genuinely didn't mind being the less successful brother. Marcus always had bigger dreams and more ambition, while I was content with simpler pleasures like coaching Little League baseball and fixing things with my hands. Sarah used to joke that I had the bigger heart while Marcus had the bigger wallet, and she was probably right. I loved my brother and was proud of what he'd accomplished, even if we lived in completely different worlds. But looking back, I can see how the dynamic shifted after Sarah's death. Suddenly, every family gathering became an opportunity for quiet comparisons. Marcus would arrive with expensive toys for his kids, while I showed up with homemade cookies and hand-me-down clothes from garage sales. Mom would make subtle comments about how hard it must be for me to provide for 3 children alone, while Dad would awkwardly offer $20 bills that I was too proud to accept but too desperate to refuse. The worst part was watching my kids notice the differences. Tommy, who's now 10, started asking why Connor had a Nintendo Switch when he had to share an old tablet with his siblings. Emma, sweet 6-year-old Emma, with her gap-toothed smile and curly blonde hair, would quietly study Madison's designer clothes and then look down at her own thrift store dresses without saying a word. Jake, my youngest at 8, was still innocent enough to not fully understand, but even he began to notice that some families had more than others. 3 days before Christmas this year, Marcus called me while I was grabbing a quick dinner between my construction shift and my delivery route. I was sitting in my beat-up Honda Civic in the parking lot of a fast food restaurant, eating a $1 menu burger and dreading another long night of driving around town with pizza boxes. "Darren, buddy," Marcus said in that smooth voice he uses when he wants something. "I've been thinking about Christmas, and I want to help coordinate gifts with Mom and Dad this year. You know, to avoid getting the kids duplicate presents or anything like that." The offer caught me off guard. Marcus had never shown much interest in coordinating anything with me before. Usually, our Christmas exchanges were awkward affairs where his kids received elaborate gifts, while mine got books and socks from the dollar store clearance rack. "That's really thoughtful of you," I said, genuinely touched by what seemed like brotherly consideration. I've been saving up to get them some special things this year. $300 isn't much, but it's more than I've been able to manage since Sarah died. $300 can go pretty far if you shop smart, Marcus replied encouragingly. What were you thinking of getting them? I pulled out my phone and showed him the pictures my kids had drawn of their wish list items. Jake had sketched a remote control car with racing stripes and detailed wheels. Emma had carefully colored a dollhouse with pink walls, purple shutters, and tiny furniture arranged in each room. Tommy had drawn himself shooting baskets through a hoop mounted in our tiny backyard. These are perfect, Marcus said, studying each drawing with what I thought was genuine interest. Really specific, too. The kids did a great job showing exactly what they want. They've been working on these for weeks, I told him proudly. Emma spent an entire afternoon making sure the dollhouse had the right number of windows. Tommy measured our fence to make sure the basketball hoop would fit. Jake even looked up the exact model of car he wants online. I love how thoughtful they are, Marcus said. And you know what? I think we should really surprise them this year. What if we coordinate with Mom and Dad to make sure they get exactly what they're dreaming of? The idea filled me with hope. For 2 years, I'd been the father who couldn't quite provide the Christmas magic that Sarah used to create. She had a way of making even small gifts feel special, wrapping them in homemade paper, and creating elaborate treasure hunts that made Christmas morning feel like an adventure. Since her death, Christmas had become a day I dreaded because it highlighted everything I couldn't give my children. That would be incredible, I said, feeling a warmth in my chest that I hadn't experienced in months. The kids deserve something special after everything they've been through. Absolutely, Marcus agreed. They're amazing kids, and you're doing such a great job with them. Let me talk to Mom and Dad and see what we can work out. I want this to be the Christmas they remember forever. After we hung up, I sat in my car feeling more optimistic about the holidays than I had since Sarah died. Maybe this year would be different. Maybe my kids would finally get to experience the joy and wonder that every child deserves on Christmas morning. I had no idea that I'd just handed my brother the blueprint for the most devastating betrayal of my life. The phone call from Dad came exactly 1 week before Christmas, right as I was getting the kids ready for bed. Jake was already in his pajamas, brushing his teeth in the bathroom we all shared, while Emma sat on her bottom bunk braiding her doll's hair. Tommy was supposed to be cleaning his room but was actually building something with Legos that he'd probably knock over in the morning. "Darren," Dad said when I answered, his voice carrying that warm tone he reserves for conversations about the grandchildren. I wanted to talk to the kids about Christmas. Ask them what they're hoping for this year. My heart jumped a little. This was new. Usually, Dad left the holiday planning to Mom, who would buy generic gifts like puzzles and coloring books. The fact that he was personally calling to ask about wish lists felt significant, like maybe Marcus had actually followed through on his promise to coordinate something special. "They'd love to talk to you," I said, gathering my 3 kids on the couch. They've been so excited about Christmas this year. Emma went first, clutching the drawing she'd made of her dream dollhouse. At 6 years old, she has this earnest way of explaining things, like every detail is crucial to understanding her vision. "Grandpa, I want a dollhouse that's pink and purple," she said into the phone, holding her picture up even though Dad couldn't see it through the speaker. "It needs to have 3 bedrooms because the mommy doll and daddy doll need their own room, and the 2 kids need rooms too. And there has to be a kitchen with tiny plates and cups, and a living room with a little couch where the whole family can sit together." I watched her face light up as she described each room, pointing to different sections of her drawing. She'd spent hours on that picture, carefully coloring inside the lines and adding details like flowers in window boxes and a mailbox by the front door. "And Grandpa," Emma continued, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret, "the mommy doll looks just like Mommy Sarah, so when I play with the dollhouse, it's like she's still here taking care of the family." My throat tightened at that confession. Emma rarely talked about Sarah directly, but I could see how much she missed having a mother figure in her daily life. The dollhouse wasn't just a toy to her. It was a way to imagine the family life that had been taken from her when she was only 4 years old. Jake bounced onto the couch next, practically vibrating with excitement as he grabbed the phone. My 8-year-old has always been obsessed with anything that moves fast. From bicycles to motorcycles, to race cars. "Grandpa, I want a remote control car that can go really, really fast," he announced, making vrooming sounds into the speaker. "It has to be blue with white racing stripes, and it needs to have working headlights for when I drive it in the dark." Tommy said I could set up a racetrack in our backyard using cardboard boxes, and we could have competitions to see whose car is faster. "Whose car?" Dad asked, chuckling. "Well, mine will be the only car. But Tommy can time me with Mom's old stopwatch to see if I can beat my own records," Jake explained seriously. "And maybe if I practice enough, I can become a real race car driver when I grow up and buy us a big house like Uncle Marcus has." The innocent connection he made between success and material possessions stung a little, but I understood his logic. In a kid's mind, having nice things meant your family was doing well, and doing well meant everyone was safe and happy. Tommy took the phone last, and I could see him trying to act mature and responsible as the oldest at 10. He'd been helping me more around the house lately, taking on little brother duties and protective instincts that reminded me painfully of myself at that age. "Hi, Grandpa," Tommy said, sitting up straighter. "I've been wanting a basketball hoop for our backyard. Nothing too fancy. Just one that we can adjust the height on so Jake and Emma can play too when they get bigger. I measured our fence, and there's enough room if we mount it on the garage wall." "That sounds like you've really thought this through," Dad said approvingly. "I have," Tommy replied earnestly. "Dad works really hard, and I thought if we had a basketball hoop, I could teach Jake and Emma how to play, and maybe Dad could shoot baskets with us when he gets home from work. It would be fun for the whole family." The maturity in his voice broke my heart. At 10 years old, Tommy was already thinking about ways to bring our family together and create positive activities for his younger siblings. He'd grown up too fast since Sarah's death, taking on emotional responsibilities that no child should have to carry. After Dad said goodbye to each of them, the kids spent the rest of the evening working on their Christmas preparations. Emma made cards for everyone in the family, carefully writing to Grandpa and Grandma in her best first-grade handwriting and decorating them with stickers of Christmas trees and candy canes. Jake practiced his surprised face in the bathroom mirror, convinced that looking genuinely shocked when he opened presents was an important part of Christmas morning etiquette. Tommy helped me wrap the small gifts I'd managed to buy with my limited budget. A set of colored pencils for Emma, a puzzle of a race car for Jake, and a basketball for Tommy that he could use even without the hoop. They weren't the dream gifts the kids had described to their grandfather, but I'd wrapped them carefully and written heartfelt notes explaining how proud I was of each of them. "Dad," Emma said as I tucked her into bed that night, "do you think Grandpa will remember everything I told him about the dollhouse?" "I think Grandpa has a very good memory," I replied, smoothing her blanket and kissing her forehead. "I hope so," she whispered. "I've been dreaming about playing house with the mommy doll that looks like Mommy Sarah." The week leading up to Christmas felt different than the previous 2 years. There was an energy in our little house, an anticipation that reminded me of the holidays when Sarah was alive. The kids sang Christmas songs while they got ready for school, made paper snowflakes to hang in our windows, and helped me bake sugar cookies using Sarah's old recipe that I'd finally worked up the courage to attempt. I found myself feeling hopeful in a way I hadn't experienced since the accident. Maybe this year would mark a turning point for our family. Maybe my kids would finally get to experience the magic of Christmas morning that every child deserves. Maybe working with Marcus and my parents would be the beginning of a stronger, more supportive family dynamic that would help us heal from our loss. On the day before Christmas Eve, I decided to stop by my parents' house to drop off the cookies the kids had made. It was a small gesture, but I wanted to contribute something homemade to whatever celebration was being planned. I parked in the driveway and walked around to the basement door, planning to surprise Mom by leaving the cookies on the porch with a note. That's when I saw them through the basement window. Wrapped presents with tags clearly visible, written in Marcus's distinctive handwriting. To Jake, to Emma, to Tommy. The boxes were the perfect sizes for the items my kids had described to their grandfather. A large rectangular box that could easily contain a dollhouse. A smaller box, shaped exactly like a remote control car package. A tall, narrow box that looked like it might hold a basketball hoop. My heart swelled with gratitude. Marcus had really done it. He'd coordinated with our parents to make sure my kids received exactly what they'd been dreaming of. I felt guilty for ever doubting his motives or feeling suspicious about his sudden interest in family cooperation. I left the cookies on the porch with a note thanking everyone for making Christmas special for my children, then drove home practically floating with excitement. Tomorrow night we'd go to Christmas Eve service at the little Methodist church Sarah used to attend, and the next morning we'd drive to my parents' house where my kids would finally get to experience the joy they deserved. I had no idea that those perfectly wrapped presents with my children's names were about to become weapons in a betrayal so cruel it would change our family forever. Christmas morning started the way it had for the past 2 years, with me trying to create magic in our small living room, while pretending my heart wasn't breaking from all the things I couldn't provide. I woke up at 6 o'clock and quietly arranged the modest gifts I'd managed to afford under our little artificial tree. A 3-foot Charlie Brown special. I'd bought half price after Thanksgiving. The kids discovered their presents an hour later, and their genuine excitement over coloring books, candy canes, and small toys reminded me that children have an amazing capacity for finding joy in simple things. Emma hugged her new box of colored pencils like it was treasure. Jake immediately started assembling his race car puzzle on the coffee table, and Tommy bounced his new basketball against our kitchen wall, despite my half-hearted protests about noise. "This is really cool, Dad," Tommy said, spinning the basketball on his finger. "When we get to Grandma and Grandpa's house, maybe I can show everyone my dribbling skills. I'm going to bring my colored pencils and draw pictures for everyone," Emma announced, already planning her artistic contributions to the family gathering. "And I'm going to tell Grandpa about how fast I think my remote control car will go when I get it," Jake added, making vrooming sounds as he pushed imaginary cars around the carpet. Getting everyone dressed and ready took longer than usual because they kept stopping to play with their new gifts. But I didn't mind. Their happiness was infectious, and for the first time in months, I felt like maybe I was getting this single father thing right. I'd even bought myself a new button-down shirt for Christmas dinner, the first new piece of clothing I'd purchased in over a year. The drive to my parents' house took 20 minutes through neighborhoods, decorated with elaborate light displays and inflatable lawn decorations. The kids pressed their faces against the windows, pointing out their favorite houses and making up stories about the families who lived inside. Emma insisted that any house with pink Christmas lights must have a little girl who loved dollhouses, while Jake declared that houses with blue lights obviously belonged to families with race car drivers. "I wonder if Uncle Marcus and Aunt Jessica are already there," Tommy mused as we turned onto my parents' street. "I hope Connor and Madison like the cards we made for them. I'm sure they'll love them," I replied, though I felt a familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach about comparing my homemade contributions to whatever expensive gifts Marcus and Jessica would bring. My parents live in a modest 2-story house with white siding and green shutters, the same place where Marcus and I had spent our childhood fighting over the last piece of pie and building snow forts in the backyard. Mom always decorates the front porch with garland and red bows, and this year was no exception. Everything looked warm and welcoming as we pulled into the driveway behind Marcus's spotless Suburban. "They're already here," Emma squealed, pointing to the luxury vehicle that cost more than I made in 6 months. We gathered our gifts and cards from the trunk, mostly homemade items and small presents wrapped in discount paper, and walked up the front steps. I could hear laughter and conversation through the door, the comfortable sounds of family gathered for the holidays. Mom answered the door with a bright smile that seemed slightly strained around the edges. "Merry Christmas," she exclaimed, hugging each of the kids and giving me a quick pat on the shoulder. Come in, come in." Everyone's in the living room. The scene that greeted us in my parents' living room should have been perfect. A fire crackled in the fireplace, Christmas music played softly from the old stereo, and the smell of ham and cinnamon rolls filled the air. Dad sat in his recliner with a cup of coffee, Marcus and Jessica were on the couch, and their kids Connor and Madison were on the floor, organizing what looked like an impressive pile of already opened gifts. "Uncle Darren," Connor called out, waving a new handheld gaming device. "Look what Santa brought me." Madison held up a expensive-looking doll still in its packaging, and I got the American Girl doll I wanted with all the accessories. I smiled and nodded, but something felt off. The timing was strange. It was only 10 o'clock in the morning, early for a family that usually didn't exchange gifts until after Christmas dinner, and there was an awkward energy in the room, like everyone was trying too hard to act normal. "We decided to let the kids open their gifts early this year," Mom explained quickly, not quite meeting my eyes. "You know how excited they get." "That makes sense," I replied, though it didn't really. My parents had always been sticklers for tradition, insisting that presents wait until after we'd eaten and spent time together as a family. That's when I noticed them. Sitting in front of Connor and Madison, among their other opened gifts, were three items that made my blood turn to ice in my veins. A remote control car with blue paint and white racing stripes, identical to the one Jake had drawn in careful detail. A pink and purple dollhouse with multiple rooms and tiny furniture, exactly matching Emma's artistic vision. A adjustable basketball hoop still in its box, featuring the exact specifications Tommy had described to his grandfather. The room started spinning as the reality hit me. These weren't coincidental similarities or generic toys that happened to match my kids' wishes. These were the exact items my children had dreamed of, described in detail, and drawn pictures of. Every specification was perfect, down to the racing stripes on the car and the color scheme of the dollhouse. My kids stood frozen in the doorway, their homemade cards and small gifts clutched in their hands, staring at their cousins playing with their dreams. Emma's face crumpled as she watched Madison arrange the dollhouse furniture, the same tiny pieces she'd imagined using to recreate a family with her mommy Sarah doll. Jake's mouth hung open as Connor raced the remote control car across the carpet, the exact car that was supposed to help him become a race car driver someday. Tommy, my responsible 10-year-old, looked from the basketball hoop to his cousins to me, trying to process what was happening. "Dad," he whispered. "Those look like—" "I know," I whispered back, my voice barely audible over the sound of my heart breaking. The adults in the room were all acting strangely. Dad couldn't seem to look directly at me, busying himself with his coffee cup and staring at the fire. Mom kept glancing nervously between my kids and me, wringing her hands and making small talk about the weather. Marcus sat on the couch with an expression I couldn't quite read, while Jessica seemed genuinely uncomfortable, like she was witnessing something she didn't want to be part of. "Where are our presents?" Emma asked in a small voice that barely carried across the room. The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Mom's face flushed red as she scrambled for an explanation. "Well, sweetheart," she stammered, "Santa might be running a little late this year. You know how busy he gets on Christmas morning." It was a ridiculous explanation for 10-year-old Tommy and 8-year-old Jake, who were old enough to understand the logistics of Christmas morning, but Mom seemed desperate to maintain some kind of fiction rather than face the reality of what was happening. "But we told Grandpa exactly what we wanted," Jake said, confusion and hurt evident in his voice. "We drew pictures and everything." That's when Marcus stood up and walked over to me, placing a hand on my shoulder in what anyone watching might have interpreted as brotherly support. "Darren," he said quietly, "can I talk to you in the kitchen for a minute?" I followed him out of the living room, leaving my kids standing awkwardly by the doorway while their cousins continued playing with their stolen dreams. In the kitchen, Marcus closed the door and turned to face me with an expression of fake concern. "Look, I need you to understand something," he said in a low voice. "Mom and Dad are having some financial troubles right now. Dad's retirement fund took a hit with the market changes, and they couldn't afford to buy expensive gifts for everyone this year." "What are you talking about?" I asked, though pieces were starting to fall into place in my mind. "I stepped in to help Connor and Madison because, well, Jessica and I are in a position to provide for our kids," Marcus continued. "But I thought you'd understand that Mom and Dad just couldn't stretch their budget to cover all the grandchildren this year. I figured you'd be grateful that they managed to get your kids anything at all." The manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty. He was reframing the situation to make me look selfish and entitled, as if I was the unreasonable one for expecting my children to receive the gifts they'd been specifically asked about and promised. "You told me you were going to coordinate with them," I said, my voice shaking with the effort to stay calm. "You asked me for their wish lists. You said you wanted to make this Christmas special for them." "I never promised anything specific," Marcus replied smoothly. "I said we'd try to work something out. Sometimes things don't go according to plan, and you need to be more understanding of other people's limitations." In the living room, I could hear Emma starting to cry quietly, and the sound cut through me like a knife. My 6-year-old daughter was watching another little girl play with the dollhouse she'd dreamed about for weeks, the dollhouse that was supposed to help her feel connected to her dead mother. I walked back into the living room and saw my 3 children huddled together near the Christmas tree, trying to process a betrayal too complex and cruel for their young minds to fully comprehend. They'd been set up, used as pawns in some twisted game I was only beginning to understand. "Come on, kids," I said quietly. "Get your coats. We're going home." The silence in the car was deafening as we pulled out of my parents' driveway. Emma sat in her booster seat clutching the homemade Christmas cards she'd never gotten to give out, tears streaming down her cheeks. Tommy stared straight ahead with his jaw clenched, trying to be strong for his younger siblings but clearly struggling with emotions too big for a 10-year-old to handle. Jake kept looking back at the house through the rear window, as if expecting someone to run outside and explain that it had all been a terrible mistake. "Dad," Emma whispered as we stopped at the first red light, "did we do something wrong?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. My 6-year-old daughter was trying to make sense of inexplicable cruelty by blaming herself, the way children do when the world doesn't make sense. "No, sweetheart," I said, meeting her eyes in the rearview mirror. "You didn't do anything wrong. None of you did anything wrong. Sometimes grown-ups make bad choices, and kids get hurt even though they don't deserve it. But why would Uncle Marcus give our presents to Connor and Madison?" Jake asked, his 8-year-old brain still trying to process the logistics of betrayal. "I don't know, buddy," I replied honestly. "I really don't know." Tommy had been quiet for the entire 15-minute drive, but as we pulled into our driveway, he finally spoke up. "I hate Christmas," he said flatly. "And I hate Uncle Marcus. And I don't want to see them ever again." "Tommy." I started, but he was already out of the car and running toward our front door. Getting everyone inside and settled took every ounce of patience I had left. Emma went straight to her room and closed the door, something she rarely did. Jake sat at the kitchen table and methodically tore up the Christmas card he'd made for his grandfather, ripping it into tiny pieces that he arranged in a neat pile. Tommy disappeared into the backyard and started aggressively shooting baskets with his new basketball against our garage door, each throw harder than the last. I sat on our old couch and tried to figure out what had just happened. The cruelty was so calculated, so precise, that it couldn't have been an accident or miscommunication. Marcus had deliberately taken my children's specific wishes they'd shared with their grandfather in good faith, and used them to benefit his own kids while leaving mine with nothing. But why? What could he possibly gain from hurting 3 innocent children who'd already lost their mother? What kind of person orchestrates that level of betrayal against his own family? I spent the rest of Christmas Day trying to salvage something positive from the wreckage. I made pancakes shaped like Christmas trees for lunch, using the last of our syrup, and pretending it was a special holiday tradition. I put on Christmas movies and sat with the kids on the couch, but their usual enthusiasm was gone. Emma curled up next to me without speaking. Jake stared at the television without really watching. And Tommy came inside only when I called him for meals. That evening, I tucked each of them into bed with extra hugs and promises that next Christmas would be different. Emma asked if we could move to a place where Uncle Marcus didn't know where we lived. Jake wanted to know if other families had uncles who stole Christmas presents. Tommy just turned his face to the wall and pretended to be asleep. I stayed up until 3 in the morning, sitting at our kitchen table and trying to make sense of what had happened. I kept replaying every conversation with Marcus, looking for signs I'd missed or warnings I should have heeded. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this couldn't have been a spur-of-the-moment decision. This level of manipulation required planning, coordination, and a complete disregard for the emotional well-being of 3 grieving children. When I finally fell asleep on the couch, I dreamed about Sarah. In the dream, she was wrapping Christmas presents and humming softly, the way she used to do on Christmas Eve while I pretended to sleep. She looked up at me with that gentle smile that had gotten me through so many difficult days and said, "Don't let them break our babies, Darren. They've been through enough." I woke up at 7:30 the next morning to the sound of my phone buzzing incessantly on the coffee table. 17 missed calls from various family members, all in the span of 2 hours. Mom had called 6 times, Dad had called 4 times, Marcus had called 3 times, and even Jessica had called twice. There were also 2 calls from numbers I didn't recognize, but it was the single text message that made my stomach drop and my hands shake as I read it. The message was from my 82-year-old grandmother, Ruth. She lived in Sunset Manor, an assisted living facility about 40 minutes away, and I hadn't heard from her in several months. Grandma Ruth had always been sharp as a tack, but at her age, family members didn't expect regular communication. Her text was brief but chilling. "Darren, I need to see you immediately. Come alone. Don't tell anyone you're coming. Marcus has been stealing from the family for years, and I have proof. Your father gave him $20,000 last month that was meant for you and your children. I've been waiting for the right moment to tell someone who would know what to do. After what happened yesterday, I can't stay quiet anymore. I read the message 3 times, my mind struggling to process what she was saying. $20,000? Meant for me and my children? Marcus stealing from the family for years? I looked around our modest living room with its thrift store furniture and clearance decorations, thinking about all the nights I'd worked double shifts to pay rent, all the times I'd chosen between buying groceries and filling up my gas tank, all the moments I'd felt like a failure as a provider for my kids. If Grandma Ruth was telling the truth, Marcus hadn't just stolen Christmas presents. He'd been stealing our future, our security, our chance at a better life while positioning himself as the generous brother and successful son. I checked on the kids, who were still sleeping off the emotional exhaustion of the previous day, then grabbed my keys and headed for the door. Whatever Grandma Ruth had to tell me, I had a feeling it was going to change everything I thought I knew about my family. The drive to Sunset Manor felt like the longest 40 minutes of my life. My phone kept buzzing with incoming calls that I ignored, and I found myself gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. By the time I pulled into the parking lot of the assisted living facility, my heart was racing, and my palms were sweating. Grandma Ruth was waiting for me in the lobby, sitting in her wheelchair with a manila folder in her lap and an expression I'd never seen before on her weathered face. At 82, she was still beautiful in the way that strong women age, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that missed nothing. "Darren," she said simply as I approached, "thank you for coming so quickly. We have a lot to discuss, and not much time to waste." "Grandma, what's going on?" I asked, sitting down in the chair across from her. "Your text said Marcus has been stealing from the family? What does that mean?" She opened the manila folder and pulled out a stack of papers, bank statements, photocopied checks, printed emails, and what looked like legal documents. "It means, my dear boy," she said in a voice that was both gentle and steely, "that your brother has been systematically robbing this family blind for the past 5 years, and yesterday's cruelty to your children was just the latest chapter in a very long and very ugly story." Grandma Ruth's apartment at Sunset Manor was exactly what I expected: neat, organized, and filled with family photos spanning 8 decades of life. What I didn't expect was the sophisticated computer setup in the corner, complete with a printer, and what appeared to be a filing system that would make an accountant proud. "You look surprised by my technology," she said with a wry smile as she wheeled herself over to a small table by the window. "People assume that because I'm 82, I can't navigate the modern world. The truth is, I've been watching and learning for years, especially when it comes to family finances." She spread the contents of the manila folder across the table with the precision of someone who'd organized evidence before. Bank statements, canceled checks, email printouts, and financial documents created a paper trail that painted a picture I never could have imagined. "Your grandfather left me well provided for when he passed," Ruth began. "But more importantly, he left me with a sharp mind and a deep suspicion of people who take advantage of family trust. I've been monitoring Marcus's financial relationship with your parents for the past 5 years, and what I've discovered would shock you." She handed me a bank statement from my father's checking account. Even upside down, I could see multiple large withdrawals, each one made out to Marcus Miller Realty. "These are loans," Ruth explained, "that Marcus has been taking from your father's retirement account. 5,000 here, 10,000 there, always with promises to pay it back with interest from his real estate commissions." "How much total?" I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. $63,000 over 5 years, she replied, matter-of-factly. "Not one penny has been repaid." I stared at the papers, my mind struggling to process the magnitude of what she was showing me. $63,000 was more money than I'd seen in my entire adult life. It was enough to pay off my student loans, buy a reliable car, move to a better neighborhood, and still have money left over for my kids' college funds. "But that's not the worst part," Ruth continued, pulling out a series of emails she'd printed from what appeared to be my father's email account. "Marcus has been actively discouraging your parents from helping you since Sarah died. Look at this." The email was from Marcus to my father, dated just 3 months after Sarah's funeral. "Dad, I know your heart is in the right place. But giving Darren money every time he has a crisis isn't helping him become independent. He needs to learn to stand on his own 2 feet. Tough love now will make him stronger in the long run. Another email, from 6 months ago. I'm concerned that if you keep bailing Darren out, he'll never develop the work ethic and financial discipline he needs to provide for those kids. Sarah's death was tragic, but he can't use it as an excuse forever. Email after email showed Marcus systematically undermining any attempt by our parents to offer me financial support, while simultaneously borrowing massive amounts of money for his own benefit. How did you get these? I asked, though part of me already suspected the answer. Your father forwards everything to me, Ruth said simply. He's done it for years. Ever since your mother set up his email account and accidentally included me as a recipient for family communications. He's never been comfortable with technology, so he just keeps hitting reply all without realizing I'm seeing everything. She pulled out another set of documents that made my stomach churn even more. Records showing that my father had liquidated part of his retirement fund, specifically to create a Christmas fund for my children. Money that was supposed to ensure they had a real Christmas after 2 years of struggling. This is the $20,000 I mentioned in my text, Ruth said, pointing to a withdrawal from November. Your father took this from his retirement savings specifically to buy Christmas gifts for Jake, Emma, and Tommy. He'd been planning it for months. Where did the money go? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. Marcus convinced him to hand it over for coordination purposes, Ruth replied, pulling out a recorded phone conversation. I record all my phone calls now, a habit I picked up after your grandfather started showing signs of dementia. Marcus called me 2 weeks ago to brag about how he'd saved Christmas for everyone. She pressed play on a small digital recorder, and Marcus's voice filled the room. Grandma, you should have seen how excited Connor and Madison were when they opened their presents this morning. That remote control car and dollhouse and basketball hoop were perfect choices. Dad's $20,000 went a long way when I shopped the after Thanksgiving sales. I just feel bad that Darren's kids couldn't appreciate what we got them from the dollar store. But you know how ungrateful he can be about family generosity. The recording continued for several more minutes, with Marcus describing in detail how he'd used my children's wish lists to purchase perfect gifts for his own kids, then convinced our parents that they couldn't afford elaborate presents for everyone. He actually laughed about Emma's reaction to seeing the dollhouse she'd dreamed of in another child's hands. The cruelty is breathtaking, I whispered, staring at the recorder. It gets worse, Ruth said grimly, pulling out the final section of documents. I had my lawyer friend Helen look into Marcus's real estate business. The company is failing, Darren. He owes back taxes, his business license is under review, and he's been using your parents' money to keep his office open and maintain his lifestyle. The business records showed a pattern of declining sales, missed payments, and mounting debt that painted a picture completely opposite to the successful entrepreneur Marcus pretended to be. His expensive house, luxury car, and country club lifestyle were all financed by money borrowed from our parents under false pretenses. Jessica doesn't know the extent of it, Ruth continued, but she's been asking questions. I overheard a phone call last month where she confronted Marcus about missing money from their joint account. He's been gambling, Darren. Online poker, sports betting, casino trips that he claims are business networking events. Why didn't you tell anyone before now? I asked, though I wasn't judging her. The scope of the deception was so vast, it would have been hard to know where to start. Because I was hoping he'd come clean on his own, she admitted sadly. And because I knew that exposing him would devastate your parents and potentially destroy the family. But yesterday changed everything. When he used your children's Christmas wishes as weapons against them, he crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. She reached across the table and took my hand in hers, her grip surprisingly strong for someone her age. There's something else you need to know, she said gently. I've been sick, Darren. Cancer. The doctors say I have maybe 3 or 4 months left. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Grandma, no. It's all right, she said firmly. I've had a long, full life. But I can't leave this earth knowing that Marcus is going to continue stealing from your children's future. That $20,000 was supposed to be the first installment of a college fund your father was setting up. Marcus has been sabotaging it from the beginning. She pulled out one final document that made everything clear. a handwritten will that my father had drafted but never filed, leaving a substantial inheritance to be split equally between Marcus's children and mine. In the margins, Marcus had written suggestions for modifications that would redirect most of the money to a trust fund that he would manage on behalf of all the grandchildren. "He's been planning this for years," Ruth said quietly. "Your parents' entire estate, your children's inheritance, your grandfather's life insurance money that was supposed to go to you after Sarah died. He's been systematically redirecting everything to benefit himself while making sure you stay dependent and struggling." I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the scope of the betrayal. This wasn't just about stolen Christmas presents, or even $63,000 in unpaid loans. This was about a calculated, long-term campaign to rob my children of their future while maintaining the facade of family unity. "What do we do?" I asked. Ruth smiled, and for the first time since I'd arrived, it was a smile that promised justice rather than sorrow. "We give your brother exactly what he deserves," she said, "and we make sure your children get everything that's rightfully theirs." Ruth's plan was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of confronting Marcus privately or going to my parents with accusations that might divide the family permanently, we would let him expose himself in front of everyone. All we needed was the right opportunity and the right audience. "Marcus is hosting New Year's Eve dinner," Ruth explained as she helped me organize copies of all the evidence. "He does it every year to show off his house and reinforce his image as the successful family provider. This year, that gathering is going to become his downfall." The week between Christmas and New Year's was the longest of my life. I went through the motions of normal routine, taking the kids to the library, doing laundry, working my shifts at the construction site, too. But inside I was burning with a combination of rage and anticipation that made it hard to sleep or eat. My children were still processing what had happened on Christmas. Emma had stopped talking about dollhouses entirely and spent most of her time drawing pictures of our family without any extended relatives. Jake became obsessed with building things with his hands, as if creating something tangible could help him make sense of a world where adults destroyed children's dreams. Tommy threw himself into basketball practice in our backyard, with an intensity that worried me, shooting basket after basket until his hands were raw. Marcus called twice during that week, leaving voicemails that attempted to rewrite history. In the first message, he claimed that there had been a miscommunication about Christmas gifts and suggested we get together to clear the air. In the second, he actually had the audacity to say that he'd heard I was upset about Christmas and wanted to help me understand how family finances worked. I didn't return either call. Ruth, meanwhile, was busy gathering final pieces of evidence and coordinating with her lawyer friend Helen to ensure everything was legally documented. She also reached out to Jessica separately, using the excuse of wanting to discuss holiday plans to probe for information about Marcus's gambling and financial problems. "Jessica is scared," Ruth reported after one of their conversations. "She knows something is wrong, but she's been too embarrassed to ask for help. Apparently, Marcus has been telling her that his business problems are temporary and that he's on the verge of a major real estate deal that will solve everything." The night before New Year's Eve, Ruth called with final instructions and one more shocking revelation. "I spoke to Helen about your father's will," she said. "If Marcus is managing your parents' estate planning the way I suspect, he may have already moved money around illegally. Helen thinks there could be criminal charges involved, not just family disputes." "Criminal charges?" "Elder financial abuse," Ruth explained. "Taking advantage of elderly family members for financial gain is a felony in Ohio, especially when it involves manipulation and deception. If we can prove that Marcus has been systematically stealing from your parents while they trusted him to manage family finances, he could face jail time." The idea of my brother in prison wasn't something I'd ever imagined, but the more I learned about the scope of his betrayal, the more I realized that family reconciliation might not be possible. Some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. New Year's Eve arrived cold and clear. I dressed the kids in their nicest clothes and drove to Marcus's house in the expensive subdivision, where every lawn was perfectly manicured and every driveway featured luxury vehicles. His house was a sprawling colonial with white columns and a circular driveway that always made me feel like I was visiting a movie set rather than a family gathering. Jessica answered the door, and I could see immediately that Ruth's assessment was accurate. She looked tired and stressed in a way that expensive makeup couldn't hide, and her smile seemed forced as she welcomed us in. "Darren, kids, I'm so glad you came," she said. But her eyes kept darting toward the living room where I could hear Marcus holding court with my parents and several family friends. The house was decorated beautifully for the holiday, with elegant gold and silver accents that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Connor and Madison were in the den playing with their Christmas presents, including the items that should have belonged to my children. My kids noticed immediately, but they didn't say anything. Instead, they stayed close to me, polite but distant, as we made our way through the house greeting relatives. Marcus was in his element, playing the role of successful host and family patriarch. He wore an expensive sweater and held a glass of wine that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a week, telling stories about his latest real estate deals and making jokes about his generous Christmas spirit. "Darren," he called out when he saw me, striding across the room with arms outstretched as if we were the best of friends. "I'm so glad you decided to come. I was worried you were still upset about that little misunderstanding at Christmas." "No misunderstanding," I replied evenly. Everything was exactly what it appeared to be. Something flickered in his eyes, uncertainty, maybe even fear. But he recovered quickly and launched into an explanation for anyone within earshot about how complicated holiday planning could be when budgets were tight. I let him talk. In fact, I encouraged it, asking questions about his generosity and his concern for family finances that prompted him to elaborate on his version of events. With each word, he dug himself deeper into a narrative that I was about to completely dismantle. Ruth arrived at 8 o'clock, wheeled in by Helen, her lawyer friend who was posing as a caregiver for the evening. I'd been worried about Ruth's stamina, but she looked alert and determined as she surveyed the room full of family members and friends. "What a lovely gathering," Ruth announced, accepting a glass of sparkling cider and positioning her wheelchair where everyone could see her. "Marcus, you've outdone yourself with the hospitality. It reminds me of your grandfather, always so generous with what belonged to other people." The comment could have been interpreted as a compliment, but I caught the edge in her voice and saw Marcus's confident smile falter slightly. "Grandma Ruth, you always know how to make an entrance," he replied, moving closer to her wheelchair. "I hope you're feeling well enough to enjoy the evening." "Oh, I'm feeling wonderful," she replied sweetly. "In fact, I have a little New Year's surprise for everyone. A story about family and generosity, and the importance of honesty in all our relationships." The room quieted as relatives and friends turned their attention to Ruth, expecting one of her famous stories about the old days or lessons learned through 8 decades of life. Instead, she pulled out a manila folder. "This is a story about $63,000, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent room. "Money that was borrowed from Robert and Linda over the past 5 years by someone they trusted completely." Marcus's face went white. "Grandma, this isn't really the time or place for. And this is a story about $20,000 that was supposed to buy Christmas gifts for 3 beautiful children who lost their mother and needed to believe in magic again," Ruth continued, ignoring his interruption. She pulled out the bank statements and began reading specific amounts and dates, each one corresponding to a loan that Marcus had taken from my parents. The room was completely silent, except for the sound of papers rustling and Ruth's steady, unwavering voice. "And finally," she said, "this is a story about Christmas morning, when those children watched their cousins unwrap the exact gifts they had dreamed of, while they stood empty-handed and learned that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones who hurt you the most." Marcus tried to interrupt several times, but Ruth was relentless. She presented every piece of evidence methodically and calmly, including playing the recorded phone call where Marcus bragged about using my children's wish lists to buy gifts for his own kids. By the time she finished, my father was sitting in a chair with his head in his hands. My mother was crying silently, and Jessica was staring at her husband with an expression of complete shock and revulsion. "None of this is what it looks like," Marcus said desperately, trying to regain control of the narrative. "There are explanations for everything. Business investments, family loans, misunderstandings about Christmas coordination." That's when Jessica stood up. "Stop lying," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Just stop lying, Marcus. I've been finding evidence of your gambling for months. I know about the missing money from our accounts, The second mortgage you took on our house without telling me. The credit cards you opened in my name. She turned to face my parents and the rest of the room. I've been planning to leave him, she continued, her voice getting stronger with each word. I was just waiting until after the holidays because I didn't want to destroy Christmas for the children. But after seeing what he did to Darren's kids, I can't pretend anymore. This man is not the person any of us thought he was. Marcus's carefully constructed image crumbled completely in that moment. Without Jessica's support, and with overwhelming evidence of his deception spread across Ruth's lap, he had nowhere to hide. You don't understand the pressure I've been under, he said, his voice breaking. The real estate market, the competition, trying to maintain a certain standard of living. I was going to pay everything back as soon as my business recovered. With what money? Ruth asked pointedly. Your business is bankrupt. Your house is mortgaged beyond its value. And you owe back taxes that you've been avoiding for 2 years. You've been stealing from your own parents to fund a lifestyle you can't afford and feed a gambling addiction that's destroyed your family. The confrontation continued for another hour, with Marcus alternating between denial, anger, and desperate attempts at justification. But with Jessica's defection and Ruth's irrefutable evidence, his position was hopeless. My parents, devastated by the scope of their older son's betrayal, turned to me with expressions of horror and regret. Darren, my father said, his voice barely above a whisper, I don't know how to begin to apologize for what he's done. For what we allowed him to do. We had no idea, my mother added through tears. We thought we were helping family. We thought he was coordinating gifts for the grandchildren out of love. I looked around the room at the assembled relatives and friends, many of whom were hearing about family dysfunction they never could have imagined. Marcus sat alone on his expensive sofa, abandoned by his wife and exposed as a liar and thief in front of everyone he'd tried to impress. For the first time in 2 years, I felt like I had the power to determine what happened next. The immediate aftermath of that New Year's Eve confrontation moved swiftly and decisively. Ruth's lawyer friend Helen had prepared everything in advance, so within hours of Marcus's public exposure, legal documents were being filed and financial accounts were being frozen. Jessica packed her children and moved out that very night, staying with her sister while divorce proceedings began. My parents, devastated but determined to make things right, immediately contacted their bank to stop any future access Marcus might have had to their accounts. They also wrote me a check for the full $20,000 that had been stolen from my children's Christmas fund, plus additional money to compensate for years of diverted financial help. But the most profound changes were emotional rather than financial. Marcus's real estate business collapsed within 2 weeks, as word spread through the professional community about his financial improprieties. The state licensing board launched an investigation that ultimately resulted in the revocation of his license and criminal charges for elder financial abuse. He was forced to declare bankruptcy and move into a small apartment, beginning the long process of paying restitution to our parents and facing the consequences of his actions. Jessica proved to be far stronger than anyone had given her credit for. With Ruth's help and support from an excellent divorce attorney, she secured primary custody of Connor and Madison along with financial protection from Marcus's debts. She also became an unexpected ally in rebuilding our family relationships, ensuring that her children understood the truth about what their father had done, while maintaining love and respect for their extended family. Ruth lived for 4 more months after that New Year's Eve, and they were some of the richest months of her life. She moved into a guest bedroom in my parents' house, where she could be close to family while receiving the care she needed. More importantly, she got to see her great-grandchildren every day and witness the healing that began to take place once the truth was finally revealed. My children processed the entire experience in their own unique ways. Emma started playing with dollhouses again, but now she created stories about families that faced challenges together and took care of each other honestly. Jake developed a passion for building things with his hands, declaring that he wanted to become a construction worker like his dad because making things was better than taking things. Tommy channeled his anger and hurt into sports, eventually earning a scholarship to basketball camp that summer and discovering a talent that would carry him through his teenage years. The healing between my parents and me took longer, but it was deeper and more meaningful than our relationship had ever been before. They had to confront the reality that their favoritism and financial enabling had created a monster, while I had to learn to trust them again despite years of feeling like the less valued son. Dad took early retirement from his part-time job and spent the extra time building the basketball hoop in our backyard that Tommy had originally asked for. Mom started picking up my kids from school twice a week, helping them with homework and teaching Emma how to bake the cookies that had once been Sarah's specialty. Most importantly, they both acknowledged that they had failed to protect my children from Marcus's cruelty, and they committed to spending the rest of their lives making up for that failure. The financial restitution was significant enough to change our lives substantially. With the stolen money restored and additional support from my parents, I was able to quit my second job and spend evenings at home with my children instead of delivering pizzas. We moved to a better house in a safer neighborhood, one with bedrooms for each child and a backyard big enough for the basketball hoop and Emma's garden. I also used some of the money to establish college funds for all 3 children, managed by an independent financial advisor rather than any family member. Ruth had taught me that financial independence was the foundation of healthy family relationships. But the most meaningful changes were in how our family learned to communicate and trust each other. We established new traditions that focused on honesty, gratitude, and spending quality time together rather than exchanging expensive gifts. Christmas the following year was celebrated quietly at home, with homemade decorations and simple presents that reflected genuine thoughtfulness rather than competitive generosity. Marcus attempted reconciliation several times over the following months, but I maintained firm boundaries about his access to my children. He would have to prove genuine change and complete his restitution payments before I would consider rebuilding any kind of relationship. Some betrayals require years of demonstrated remorse and changed behavior before trust can even begin to be restored. The most profound lesson came from Ruth herself, during one of our last conversations before she passed away peacefully in her sleep on a warm spring morning. "Darren," she told me, "betrayal by family is the worst kind of pain because it attacks everything you believe about love and loyalty. But it can also be the beginning of stronger relationships if you use the experience to demand honesty and set proper boundaries." She was right. The destruction of my relationship with Marcus, as painful as it was, cleared the way for authentic connections with the family members who were capable of genuine love and support. My children learned early that real love requires truth, respect, and protecting each other from harm. Lessons that will serve them well throughout their lives. 6 months after Ruth's death, I started dating Amanda, a teacher at Emma's school who had been quietly supporting my family through the crisis, without any expectation of recognition or reward. She understood that my children would always come first, and she brought her own wisdom about healing and resilience that enriched all our lives. A year later, Tommy made the middle school basketball team and dedicated his first game to his great-grandmother Ruth, the woman who had fought for justice when no one else would. Emma's dollhouse collection grew to include houses she built herself, each one representing a family that faced challenges together and emerged stronger. Jake discovered that his mechanical skills could fix almost anything that was broken, from bicycles to relationships. As for Marcus, he eventually completed a program for gambling addiction and began making regular restitution payments. His relationship with his own children was permanently damaged, but he was slowly learning that real love requires sacrifice and service rather than manipulation and control. The experience taught me that being a good father means fighting for my children even when that fight is against family members. It means teaching them that they deserve to be treated with respect and honesty, and that they should never accept cruelty in the name of family loyalty. Most importantly, it taught me that sometimes losing a relationship is the price of protecting the people you love most, and that price is always worth paying. Standing in our backyard 2 years later, watching Tommy teach his younger siblings how to shoot free throws while Amanda helped Emma plant flowers in her garden, I realized that we had built something better than what we'd lost. We'd created a family founded on truth, protected by boundaries, and strengthened by the knowledge that we would always stand up for each other. Sarah would have been proud. The scars from that Christmas betrayal will always be part of our family story. But they're also proof that we survived something that could have destroyed us. We're stronger now, wiser, and more grateful for the relationships that truly matter. Sometimes the best gift you can give your children is teaching them to recognize their own worth and demand to be treated accordingly. That's a lesson worth more than any toy could ever be. What would you do if you discovered a family member was stealing from your children? Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and protecting the people you love most? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Your experiences might help other families facing similar challenges. If this story touched you, please consider liking this video to help others find it, subscribing to hear more stories about overcoming family challenges, and sharing it with anyone who might benefit from learning about setting healthy boundaries with difficult relatives. Thank you for listening, and remember that your worth is not determined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to respond when they show you who they really are. Here's to families built on truth, protected by love, and strengthened by the courage to do what's right even when it's hard.